Hey guys, it's Courtney and welcome to the 7th and final day of Kit Week. Today we're going to be taking a look at the Scrapping for Less Flavor of the Month card kit, and you guys know the deal by now. This box is completely sealed. In fact, I just got it in the mail today, the day that I'm filming this. So we are going to take a look at what comes in the kit, but before we do that, we're going to go over some of the subscription details. So there's two different levels that you can choose from, the double dip and the banana split. The double dip is $25 per month plus shipping, and the banana split is $35 per month plus shipping. The kit reveals on the last Saturday of the month, and then the kits begin to start shipping the following week. There is a 3-month minimum subscription, but after that you can cancel at any time. And all subscribers get exclusive discounts in the Scrapping for Less store. Kits generally do sell pretty quickly, but if there are any left over, you do have the option to make a one-off purchase. Just keep in mind that being a subscriber, you do get a little bit of a discounted rate on the kit itself. So let's go ahead and take a look at what comes in this month's kit. So the Scrapping for Less kit is a little bit different than all the other kits out there, and it comes with different collections. So with a double dip level, you get 4 collections, and with a banana split, you get that little extra bag of goodies. So we're going to take a look at all of the collections in this kit. Now, first we have this set of stickers here, and these trees and bushes and all of that are so realistic. It's hard to capture on camera, but they are super realistic. So for this first collection here, and this may not be in the correct order, you can download what's called an ingredient sheet, which will give you all of the ingredients, as they call them, in the kit, as well as sketches. So for this first one, we have a mini stamp set by Sunny Studio, and this is perfect for Father's Day or a masculine card in general. We have some cork labels, and this is truly cork. It feels kind of different. I like it. We have some enamel dots, and these are all kind of like a turquoise color. And then we have the pattern papers, and these are all double-sided, and these are all great for masculine cards, which I know if you're anything like me, I sometimes struggle with. So every collection will also come with an envelope that you can use, and this is always going to be an A2 size envelope. So for the next collection, we have a mini stamp set, and this one is actually by Scrapping for Less. And you can see it has that very large sentiment. I love large sentiments like this. We also have a smaller sentiment and a little crown there. Again, perfect for masculine cards. We have a piece of, first we have some enamel accents, and these are glittery. Next, we have a piece of gold glitter cardstock, and the contents of the kit may vary. I forgot to mention that. So your pattern papers may be a little bit different, but they will come from the same paper pad. So they'll be very similar, if not the same. So for these pattern papers, they all kind of go together. They're all that dark blue or that royal blue and gold and glittery, all sparkly, and they are all double-sided. And once again, we do have that A2 size envelope. For the next collection, we have another stamp set by Scrapping for Less, and this is also great for masculine cards. I'm loving this kit because I struggle so much with masculine cards. So we have this adorable stamp set with tons of sentiments that go perfectly with it. Then we have this little banner here that I always am reminded of the ones that stick in cupcakes. We also have some enamel dots, and these are kind of like a beige color. And then we have the pattern papers once again, and these are all double-sided. Some of them are solid on one side and printed on the other, and these are all kind of plaid or gingham, or they all match pretty well together. And of course, we have the A2 size envelope. For the fourth and final collection, we have another stamp set, and this is so cute. This is a stamp set by Scrapping for Less, and they are the gnomes. And gnomes are so popular right now. We have a couple of sentiments to go along with them. These are so cute. I can't wait to color these. And we also have some baker's twine that will go really well with the pattern papers from the collection, as well as more enamel dots. And these are kind of like a burnt orange. Then for the pattern papers, again, these are double-sided, again, perfect for masculine cards, and they go so well with the gnome theme. And to finish off the collection, once again, we have another white A2 size envelope. Now, if you opt for the banana split level, you'll also get this additional collection. And this has some additional goodies. It's not necessarily going to be the typical pattern paper and embellishments. It's going to be things that go along with the rest of the banana split level kit. So for this particular one, we have a package of sequins, and the colors for these are all going to match perfectly with the previous collections that we took a look at. We have a mini distress ink pad here, and this one is tea dye. I'm not sure if they'll all be tea dye, but they'll all be a mini ink pad for distress ink. We have a coordinating die for these adorable gnomes, so they're always convenient to have if you hate fussy cutting. And then we have a stencil that will match well with that birthday king sentiment with all of these crowns. So that's a look at what's in the kit for this month. Let's dive right into the cards. Okay, so for the first card, I'm going to be using the Sunny Studio stamp set, as well as 2 of the pieces of pattern paper. And I'm going to go ahead and cut one to more of an A2 size card, and then this plaid one a little bit smaller. And I'm going to kind of layer these corner to corner so that I have a big gap off to the right-hand side and the bottom. And then I figured this needs to stand out a little bit. But before I do that, when I showed you the kit, I forgot to show you all the cardstock that comes in the kit. So I went ahead and pulled that out just to show you that also comes in the kit. It was on the bottom of the box that keeps it protected so that the corners aren't frayed, and I just totally missed it. So in order for this panel to pop out a little bit, I did layer this top panel onto a piece of white cardstock that is just a teeny tiny bit bigger, and that way it'll really pop and won't kind of blend in with the background, or the second piece of pattern paper, I should say. And I just used my Tombow Model multi glue. Now, just to let you guys know that this pattern paper is a little bit smooth-ish. So if you use wet glue, it does take a couple extra seconds to kind of stick down. So you may have to kind of maneuver that and let it sit for an extra minute or so. But anyway, I went ahead and die cut a stitched circle from a piece of white cardstock, and I went ahead and stamped out this hammer. And I did keep the coloring in here because it is nice and simple. I only used 3 colors for the handle, but I tried to pick colors that closely matched the pattern paper. And I'm just adding a little bit of shading to either side and keeping a center highlight because the handle would be more of a rounder object. For the hammer part, I guess, the metal part, I'm going to switch over to some cool gray markers, and I'm just going to add a little bit of shading, a little bit on either side, really, especially the rounder areas. And I'm starting with the C7 and only using that sparingly for the very darkest areas, and then I'll blend that out with the C5, C3, and C1. After that, I went ahead and stamped out the sentiment, and I actually used 2 sentiments for this. And actually more than 2, but I kind of pieced them together. So for the very top, I'm going to go ahead and stamp out the word congrats, and I'm stamping with VersaFine Onyx Black ink, which is a fast drying black pigment ink. Does give you a very nice impression, a really crisp one, but it isn't immediately drying. It's fast drying, faster than most pigment inks, but it doesn't dry immediately. I went ahead and lined up 3 of the other sentiments from the stamp set. There's smaller words that you can kind of piece together and make your own sentiment in this mini stamp set. And I just used the grid lines on my work surface to make sure that they were straight before popping those onto an acrylic block and stamping that with that same VersaFine ink. I also stamped the little nail right below the hammer, and I stamped it with the VersaFine. So I wasn't able to color it in because this is not a Copic safe ink. But when I stamped the hammer, I just missed the fact that there was a nail in part of the stamp set. So once that's all colored, I went ahead and took some Scotch foam tape and popped that up directly onto my card panel there, and then finished off the card with a few of the enamel dots from this collection. On to card number 2. So I have a couple of pieces of this pattern paper here, and I love this pattern paper. And I'm going to go ahead and cut this just a little bit smaller than an A2 size card. And then I'm using the back end of one of the patterns that's solid black. And then I'm cutting another piece. No, I'm not. I'm going to layer these. So I'm going to have a little bit of a black outline for this pattern paper. And again, this was really what makes it pop. And for the image itself, I'm going to obviously use this large buffalo from the stamp set from this same collection. And I went ahead and stamped this onto the craft cardstock that comes in the kit. And I stamped this with Fade Out ink by Ink on 3. I'm going to be doing some no-line coloring with my colored pencils. And this is a great ink for no-line coloring of any kind. I went ahead and die cut that with a circle die. You can see that I didn't die cut it all the way because this is going to fit right there on the bottom part of my card panel, but I didn't cut it straight. So I did have to take a little bit more off the bottom portion of that circle to make it look as if the buffalo was standing straight instead of his kind of standing on his hind legs. So next we're going to move on to the coloring, and I'm just going to show you a little bit of the coloring. Before I actually went in with my pencils, I took an EK Success journaling pen just to fill in his eyes and his nose. Because this is Fade Out ink, which does exactly what it says it does. It fades away as you color. I want to make sure that I fill the eyes and the nose in because I'm going to lose it once I start doing my coloring. So I'm going to start with the main part of his body here, and I really used the same color combination for both. And I'm not really too concerned about the coloring for this, so I didn't really take all that much time doing it. Like I said, these are going to be quick cards for all of these kits. So I went right in with that darkest color to fill in the darkest areas. Now I'm adding my shading off to the right-hand side, so that means I'm kind of keeping a left light source. And I also created a shadow where one leg is behind another, and also where I guess I probably should Google this stuff, guys. I really should Google this stuff before I do my voiceover, but once I start, I don't like to stop. But where the front portion of his body, the part that's really, really furry, is kind of hanging off the rest of his body, is also going to create a shadow. So once I had that darkest color down, you can see now that I grabbed a brown that is just a little bit lighter, and I'm just extending these areas out a little bit further. Same thing for this lightest mid-tone. I'm just going to extend them out a little bit further yet. Now, when I blend with colored pencils, when I'm going with a lighter color, I like to start directly on the darker color and kind of push that color out. If you start in the area that you have no color down, it's going to be hard to blend that color out, if that makes any sense. So if you're looking to blend colored pencils without Gamsol or anything like that, you want to make sure that you start on the darkest area and kind of bring that color out. So I'm going to go ahead and finish off with the lightest color now, and I am going to go ahead and bring that color out. Now, at first, I'm going with a pretty light hand because I want to know that I can add more color if I need to. If you go in with too heavy of a hand, you're not going to be able to add any more color. Means the paper can't take any more wax or whatever your pencils are made out of. Everyone is a little bit different. I'm using polychromos. So I always go in with a light hand first, and then if I'm happy with the shading that I have, then I can go back over that area with a little bit heavier hand and kind of get that paper saturated, I guess you could say, just like you would with Copics or any other alcohol marker or any medium really. So next I'm going to move on to the rest of his body, and I'm using the same color combination, but I'm also bringing in one more brown, which is a little bit darker. I'm just going to add my shadows in the same type of areas where one area kind of lays over another. And then I'm going to use some flicking motions, just like I would with my alcohol markers, just to add a little bit of texture to this part of his body. It, to me, looks very, very furry and very long fur. So in order to get that effect, I'm just going to use some flicking motions. And then once I have all of my browns down to have kind of a variation of color, then I'll go in with my lightest color and kind of fill in all of the areas to kind of blend those flick lines out a little bit so that they're not so pronounced. So once I had him all colored, I went ahead and took some warm gray pencils, and I'm going to color in the, I guess it would be like a horn maybe. Again, should have Googled it, guys, but I didn't. So I just used 2 of the lighter warm gray pencils for that. But then I'm also going to create a shadow underneath him so he's not kind of just floating there. And I used a little bit darker warm grays for that. I started off with a darker warm gray. I believe this is the warm gray 5 if you have the polychromos. And you can see that I'm adding just a little bit of pressure. My pencil's kind of tilted off to the side. And so I'm just adding a little bit of color here. Then I'll blend that out with the warm gray 4, warm gray 3, and warm gray 2. So once all of my coloring was complete, I also die cut a circle from some black cardstock as well. And this is going to go directly behind my image. And I want this, it's the same exact die. So obviously I'm not going to have a border on all sides of this circle or completely around the circle, but it's just going to kind of give a shadow, I guess you could say. So once I'm happy with that, I went ahead and glued down my image to that black cardstock, and I did have to trim off some excess that was kind of hanging off my card panel. Now for my sentiment, I went ahead and took one of the sentiments from that same stamp set and stamped that with that same VersaFine Onyx Black ink directly onto another piece of craft cardstock. I took a thicker strip, so it's just a little bit wider than my sentiment itself, of that black cardstock and ran that directly across my entire card panel. And I wanted this to be popped up. And in order to get this completely straight, I laid out my foam tape directly onto my card panel first, and then I laid that strip down. So if you're having a hard time lining a long strip like that up, try placing your foam tape down first. Then I went ahead and glued down the sentiment directly in the center of that strip and added a few of the enamel dots, and that is it for card number 2. Next, I'm going to go ahead and use the little gnomes, which I couldn't wait to color. So I'm going to bring out my mini Misty here just because this is a pretty large image and I've never stamped with it before. So I knew I was probably going to have to stamp it twice. I did go ahead and stamp that twice with some blackout ink, but also by Ink on 3, and this is a Copic Safe ink. I'm going to show you some of the coloring, but it's pretty much the same. So I'm going to kind of skip around a little bit. Going to start off with their beards, and I pretty much did all of these the same way with the same color combination, so I'm just going to show you one of them. I'm starting off with my W5, and I'm just going to add some shadows in random places. There's a whole lot of texture to their beards, so just use some flicking motions in some obvious areas like underneath their hat and kind of some random areas too. And then you'll blend that out with the W3 and the W1. You may even want to leave a little bit of white space, and by leaving a little bit of white space, you're even going to get more texture, or it's going to appear that there's more texture within these beards. So there's really no right or wrong when you're adding shading to something like this. It's very similar to regular hair. So I went ahead and colored all of their beards with that same color combination. And for their little noses, I'm going to use a skin tone, well, obviously skin tones, and these are small. So I'm going to go right in with my darkest color first, and I'm just going to add a little bit of shading on either side of their little noses with the E04, blend that out a little bit with the E11, and then finish off just in the center with the E01. Next, I'm going to go ahead and color their hats. And I did leave all of this in here just so that you guys could see the color combination that I'm using. And the color combinations that I am using is based on the pattern paper from this collection. So off to the side that you guys can't see, I have a piece of the pattern paper and I'm using that as a guide as I'm pulling out whatever markers I want to use. So for this first hat, I added a little bit of shading on either side. Again, this would be a round object and more a little bit towards the base. And this particular hat is kind of bent and there's a little flick line to indicate that. So I used that to my advantage and added a little bit of shading there as well. And that will add a lot of shape to the hat itself. For the next color combination here, we're going to bring out some greens and I'm pretty much doing the same thing. Now this hat has a little curvy line that you can see, and this just indicates where there would be kind of like a wrinkle within the hat. And again, I'm going to use that to my advantage and just go directly above that, and each and every time that I move down to the lightest color, I'm just going to extend that little curvy line out. And again, this is just what's going to give you that texture within the fabric of the hat. There's also the little band around the base of the hat. And I colored this the same color, but you can certainly switch it up. But you can notice here that I'm only adding shading on either side, but more towards the bottom of it, just so that I don't have two of the darkest areas touching each other and directly next to each other. You can do it, there's nothing wrong with that, but they tend to blend in with one another and you won't be able to tell what is what if you have two of the dark areas directly next to one another. Next, we're going to move on to kind of a reddish combination here, and this closely matches the pattern paper as well. And again, this hat is very similar to the one that we just colored in that it has that band on the bottom. So I'm going to do my shading the same exact way for that. And you can see on the very tip of the hat, there's 3 or 4 little flick lines. And again, this is just indicating where there would be some wrinkles or where the hat would be bent. And so I did add those little flick lines and extended those out each and every time as I moved down the spectrum. Now, I'm going to use the E04 as my lightest midtone, and there is really nothing as far as this tone, like a mauve-y, reddish tone that will blend with that. But I always use the E04 as one of my midtone or my darkest skin tone color. So I decided to bring in the E11 just to see how it would look, and I actually really like the look of it. It definitely tones down the reddish look to it, but it does blend well. So it worked. I'm going to go ahead and finish off this last hat here with some B90 markers, and there's not a whole lot of shape to this one. There is a pattern on this hat, but I'm going to ignore that and just color this in solid. Again, you can certainly add multiple colors if you choose, but just going to stick to the B90s for this one. For their little shoes, 2 of them are already, or 2 pairs of shoes, I guess you could say, are already solid images. But I am still going to add a little bit of shading. Because I used a Copic Safe ink, you don't always necessarily get a really crisp impression. So it's kind of blotchy a little bit. So I just filled that in with my black marker. Same thing with the shoes that are not solid that I did color in. And I'm just going to extend that out a little bit with the C7 and then finish off with the C5 as being my highlight. Normally I would go a little bit lighter than that, but being the shoes for the other 2 gnomes are already solid, I didn't want to go too light. I wanted them to kind of match each other. So once my coloring was all complete, I am going to use the coordinating die that comes in the banana split level and line that up, tape that down with some Post-it note tape so it doesn't shift around when going through my die cutting machine, and then ran that through my Gemini. So next we're going to go ahead and assemble the card, and this is a super simple card as well, but I did mess up. But it ended up working out well. So my plan was to layer this pattern on top of the more pattern, I guess the one with squiggly lines, on top of this reddish one, which is also patterned, but it's more of a subtle pattern. And I went ahead and die cut a rectangle out of that top, what's going to be the top layer. And the more I layered this on top of each other, it was a little bit too busy for me. If you guys know me, I like more of I don't know. I struggle with pattern paper. I'll tell you that right now. I struggle with it because I can't seem to get them to look right. I admire those of you who have an eye for that. I just don't. So I wasn't loving it, but I figured I'm just going to go with it. I'm using a craft card base as well. And then I decided to pop this panel up that has that little window. However, when I added my foam tape to this panel, I added it to the wrong side. I added it to the side with the squiggly lines that was supposed to be the top of my card, which is fine because I actually liked it better. I actually liked the other side showing a little bit better once I lined everything up. So I guess it was a happy accident. And once I had that done, I removed the backing of all of my foam tape. And you could certainly make this a shaker card, but like I said, I'm keeping it nice and simple. And I went ahead and lined that up so that a little bit of that pattern paper below it is showing through on all four sides and obviously through the window as well. I went ahead and lined up my little gnomes in this little window, and I want them to look as if they're popping up from the bottom of it. So I kind of tucked it underneath before I added any pressure to my foam tape before I made that permanent. Then I can kind of just lift this up and add my adhesive. I did have to cut off a little bit off to the side just so that it tucked in my window. Now for my sentiment, again, keeping this nice and simple, I went ahead and heat embossed a sentiment on top of a piece of that burgundy type color of the pattern paper that I used below. And I treated that with my anti-static tool, stamped that with some Versamark ink, sprinkled on some white embossing powder, and heat set that. Now again, remember that there's a little bit of shine and a little bit of slickness to this pattern paper. So when you're stamping, just be super careful because especially with Versamark, it kind of slides all over the place. So you just have to be super careful, straight up and down with your stamp. I went ahead and trimmed this down into a sentiment strip and just cut one side off at an angle and then pop that up with some foam tape directly underneath my little window. Last, I added a few highlights with a white gel pen, just mainly to their hats, just to add a little bit, to kind of just boost up my coloring a little bit. And that is it for card number 3. Moving on to the 4th card, I'm going to use the stencil. And I want this to be gold. These are little crowns. I want them to be gold, but I do not have any gold texture paste or any glimmer paste or anything like that. I taped down my card panel, which is 5 by 3 3/4, and then I'm going to use fossilized amber distress oxide ink. Now, it's not gold. It's a little bit yellowish, more yellowish than goldish, but it's the closest ink that I have to gold. So I'm using a blending brush here and just filling in all of my little crowns. And then I'm going to take some regular glimmer paste, and this is by Nuvo, by Tonic. And this is just the clear. This doesn't have any color to it. It's just clear with a little bit of shimmer. And then I'm going to go directly over my stencil with that. And what will happen is this will mix with the ink that we already had laid down. Now you can use your palette knife to mix in the color, kind of just scribble on some of your ink onto like a Ranger craft mat or something like that and mix it in. But I'm just too lazy for that. And I don't like to contaminate the rest of my glimmer paste, especially if I mix too much. So I'm just taking little bits at a time. You can see my jar is almost empty anyway, and just filling in each one of these little crowns. Once that's done, you're going to very carefully remove your stencil and make sure that you wash that along with your palette knife right away. And then I let this dry for a couple of hours. Once that is dry, I can go ahead and remove the Post-it note tape that I used to hold it down. And if any of the glimmer paste is kind of sticking off the panel, you can just snip that away with your scissors. So next I'm taking a piece of the pattern paper. This will go behind my stenciled background, and the white was just too much because there was no white anywhere else. So in order to add white to my pattern paper, I'm just going to bring out my white gel pen and my T-square ruler. You can use any straight edge here, and I'm just going to draw lines on each one of those blue little stripes. And this will add just a little bit of white so that my pattern paper kind of matches the rest of everything else and that white doesn't stand out too much. Not worried about the center, you're only going to see the outside anyway. So I went ahead and adhered everything together. I used my wet glue to adhere my little crown background there to my pattern paper, just leaving a little bit of edge on all four sides. And you can only see a little bit of that white gel pen. Went also ahead and adhered this down to a white A2 size note card, again, leaving just a small border. Again, this is going to bring out a little bit more of that white. For my sentiment, I took another piece of the pattern paper, stamped that again with the Versamark ink, again being very careful so that it doesn't slide around too much, sprinkled on some white embossing powder and heat set that. I cut this down to just a rectangle, basically, just around the sentiment itself. And I also cut down a piece of the pattern paper that's just that gold, just for a border, just so that so it stands out a little bit more. Now my golds don't match perfectly, but it is what it is. Went ahead and popped that up in the lower right hand corner with some foam tape. Now as for as much sparkle as this has, which I usually love sparkle, wasn't really wild about this one, but it does have a ton of shimmer. Next, moving on to the fifth and final card, I'm going to bring back out that Sunny Studio stamp set, and this time I'm going to create my own background. So I took the saw and the hammer and adhered those or popped those onto an acrylic block together. That way, I don't really have to do much stamping. Just going to go ahead and stamp out a random pattern onto a piece of Nina Solar White 80-pound cardstock. And I'm just twisting and turning my acrylic block as I go so that my pattern isn't all exactly the same, even though they're pretty much positioned the same way. Once I got almost done, I had a little bit of a gap. So I did stamp these individually, well, the hammer anyway, just to fill in those gaps. I also took the little nail stamp and filled in any gaps that I had between these images, especially these larger gaps. And sometimes I stamped more than one, sometimes I stamped just two. And because I'm not patient and I was moving too fast, I didn't necessarily get a great impression each and every time because, again, I just don't have the patience. So in order to fix that, I did take an EK Success journaling pen, which is a Copic safe pen. So you can use any Copic safe pen or alcohol marker safe pen as long as you're coloring with alcohol markers. And I just kind of filled those areas in and fixed those areas that weren't stamped perfectly before I actually moved on to my coloring. So I'm not going to show you all of the coloring again, because the hammers I colored the same way as I did for the first card, but I am going to show you the saw. Now you can see that I have a piece of pattern paper off to the side, and again, I'm using that as my guide as I'm picking the Copic markers that I'm using. Going to use the same C markers as I did for the hammer, and I'm just going to add a little bit of shading to the bottom portion of the saw and where the handle kind of overlaps the blade. And for the handle itself, I'm going to bring out some YR markers and just add a little bit of shading to the same side as I added the shading to the saw blade itself. So if I added it to the bottom, that's where I'm going to add the shading to the handle portion. So I started off with a YR07, blended that out with a YR04, then a YR02, and then I brought in a Y21, which is pretty different from the other colors that I'm using, but it did brighten everything up. And because the 1 is very close to the 2 for the last numbers, and if you guys are familiar with the Copic system, you'll know what I mean by that. They're going to blend well together. For the nails, I just added a little bit of shading with some C markers. So once all of my coloring was complete, I went ahead and trimmed this down pretty far. I think I trimmed this down. I took a 3/4 of an inch off of the top and the bottom, and then I cut some of the pattern paper down just a little bit smaller than an A2 size card. Also used some of this orangish color cardstock that comes in the kit and just cut this a little bit larger than my panel, again, just to mat that to make it really pop. Went ahead and adhered everything together with my Tombow Mono Multi Glue. I also used that same orangish cardstock for my card base as well, and you will see just a little bit of that border showing for the pattern paper, around the pattern paper as well, just to kind of keep everything matching and cohesive. Went ahead and popped that up, or not, didn't pop it up, glued it down to the center of that pattern paper. And for my sentiment, I created another white heat embossed sentiment, this time on that orange cardstock with one of the sentiments from the same stamp set, and cut that into a really, really skinny little strip. But this is going to go across the entire length of my colored panel there. So it's not just going to be a strip popped up, it's just going to lay flat across my entire card. I did have to trim a little bit off the side because I just didn't stamp straight. So that is it for the 5th and final card from the Flavor of the Month card kit. Here is a quick look at all 5 cards that we created today. As always, I will leave links and information about the Flavor of the Month card kit in the description box below. Thank you guys so much for stopping by today, and have a great day. Bye.